I'm now going to introduce Dr. Jodie O'Connor, Principal Advisor, Restoration, Coorong Department for Environment and Water. Jodie has a PhD in ornithology and more than 17 years' experience working on local and international ecology and restoration projects with a focus on drivers of declines and restoring habitats to support native species. She's worked on the River Murray and Coorong science, monitoring, policy, restoration and evaluation projects for the past 12 years, including her current role in the Healthy Coorong Healthy Basin Program. Welcome, Jodie.
Thank you. Don't start heckling me already, Jess. All right, so I'm Jodie. I'm here to talk to you about the draft restoration roadmap today, explaining our current thinking and getting your feedback as well in our next session. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and work, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. We acknowledge and respect the deep spiritual connection and the relationship that Ngarrindjeri and First Nations of the South East have to country and to the Coorong and the region. So it's really clear from the presentations today that the Coorong is a particularly special wetland. It's a complex and dynamic system with many interconnected parts. All of the living things in the system rely on each other in some way, and they're very much influenced by underlying physical drivers, things like water flow and its flushing effects that we've heard about. These in turn affecting salinities, nutrient levels, water levels, and thus the availability and quality of habitats available for our food web species. It's really important to acknowledge that Ngarrindjeri and our First Nations of the South East have understood the value of these connections and the importance of caring for country for a very long time. I'd say that everybody in this room has their own strong connection to the Coorong and desire to care for it, and that's why we're here today. So as you've heard today, we now have a much better understanding of the current state of the Coorong, including the ecological drivers and the functions that require intervention to get us on more of a trajectory towards a desired state. So our understanding of the current state of the Coorong, or what has been predominant probably over the last 5 to 8 years in particular, is that it is that hyper-eutrophic system, so very nutrient enriched that Luke talked about. That's been exacerbated by low connectivity and flushing, so less water moving through the system and less water moving to the South Lagoon in particular, so less of that export of salt and nutrients. Those things leading to extended periods of hypersalinity, so high salinities that are higher than we want for longer than we want at some times. And those things above leading to poor habitat quality. So we've got the more frequent monosulfidic black oozes that Luke talked about. We've got some algal mats in some years that can be quite predominant across parts of the Coorong, and declining populations of some species. With the recent flood, we've seen those significant flows and positive responses in the short term, but we also need to be ready for future conditions, which may not be as good. The system is tracking as we would expect. It's responding in the way we would expect based on modelling, for example, to those floods, which is good that our data and our knowledge matches what's happening. So what is the program aiming for? Like Michelle said, we went through this exercise a few years ago and we keep updating it. What is our desired state for the system? It's more of that mesotrophic state, so moderate nutrients, things like plants, etc., need nutrients to live and grow, but we don't want so many that we have these black oozes. We want improved connectivity and flushing. We want export of salt and nutrients from the system. We want to see variable salinities. They naturally vary through the year, but we don't want to see those really high maximums. We want lower maximums. All of those things above, if we get those drivers right, should help to improve habitat quality. Improved water and sediment means improved habitat for resilient food webs. And in speaking to Ngarrindjeri and First Nations of the South East, in some targeted consultation over the last few months, we're really trying to integrate some of their values into desired state as well. So an increased ability for people and First Nations to connect with country, sharing knowledge between generations and caring for their Ngāchis and Boatis, which are their totem species. So, what's the strategy to get towards the desired state? We've developed this draft restoration roadmap. There's one of the brochures you can see on the right there, and hopefully most people have picked one up already. So we've been developing this over the past year in consultation with a number of our key stakeholders. It describes how we got to this point and sets out the overarching principles to restore the Coorong through things like proposed infrastructure, small and regional scale restoration activities within an integrated package, ongoing engagement, really important, First Nations, community, scientists, we know our key stakeholders, ongoing monitoring, and all of these things feeding into ongoing adaptive management. So people like Adrienne learn and improve the way that we manage the system every year. So the roadmap that we've developed is based on both Australian and international standards in restoration. You can see those documents to the right there. And we've drawn on both of these documents and developed these 7 key principles to drive our program going forward. They're very intuitive. They're things like engaging stakeholders, which we've been doing and we will continue to do, drawing on many types of knowledge, the science that we've heard about today, First Nations knowledge, local knowledge, including a range of activities to seek the highest level of recovery possible. That's what we're aiming for, and using clear targets and goals to measure our progress against those. We're also referring to native systems while considering environmental change and supporting ecosystem recovery, including a range of activities within a continuum. So we want to look at activities that we can upscale or apply in different areas as needed. So, how do we get there? We're proposing in this roadmap with a package of 3 broad types of integrated restoration actions applied against different spatial scales and time scales, so not just one silver bullet. Starting off with our regional wetland management, and there we have approved to do some implement some small scale infrastructure to help manage water levels at 3 regional wetlands within proximity to the Coorong. So Lake Horton North, down near Robe, Taringi, which is Raukan land between Lake Albert and Alex, and then Tolderol up the lake, top of Lake Alex there. So Tom's talk set this one up really well. What we're trying to do is provide short to medium term support for foraging shorebirds, so providing that complementary habitat for them within the region while we're trying to fix some of the bigger issues in the Coorong. Tom's demonstrated that, yep, birds fly, they move, they're dynamic, they respond to different conditions, and we already know that the birds in the Coorong, through the tracking work, use these wetlands. This concept works really well. Anyone knows Tolderol well up the top here? You can see this bay. There's a series of bays, artificial bays in Tolderol, which are manually managed, and they have been since the 1960s, to provide the kind of water levels that shorebirds need. And this site's tiny, but it actually supports similar numbers of things like curlew sandpipers as the same as the entire South Lagoon in some years. So it works. So to give a bit of a case study is Taringi wetland, and Tim talked about the importance of this one to the Ngarrindjeri community as well. It's land owned by the Aboriginal Lands Trust, and it's managed by the Raukan Community Council. It's right near the Raukan community. You can see up the top there, there's a school there as well. This wetland is an important habitat mosaic, including shallow water and mudflat. What we're planning on doing here is installing a regulator. So this is the lake over here. So installing a regulator here. What regulators do is they manage water flow in and out of a wetland. So we can open this up to let water in from the lakes and then close it off to maintain water levels in the wetland for these shorebirds. It's a significant site for Ngarrindjeri, and they have been heavily involved in the development of this project. It also offers significant ecotourism and education opportunities, so boasting social, ecological and cultural values here. Okay, so another major restoration action for the Coorong itself is the proposed long-term infrastructure. The purpose of this infrastructure is to initiate the hydrological remediation, so improving flushing and export of salt and nutrients from the system. Okay, so we've been investigating infrastructure options for the last few years. We started off in 2020 up here, looking at examples of wetland restoration at an international scale, and came up with a really long list of infrastructure options that could potentially improve flushing in the system. Throughout 2021 here, we looked more closely at this long list, undertaking or more detailed feasibility, modelling using the Coorong Dynamics model that Claire introduced, a lot of ecological assessments of the outputs of those models, cultural heritage surveys, and using those to develop some concept designs. Last year, the program put forward a proposal to the Australian Government to request approval to assess the 3 shortlisted options in more detail. Just want to highlight this is a stage we're at now where this yellow arrow is, and that this remains an investigations project. No decision has been made to proceed with any particular infrastructure option. So what are those options? There are 3 shortlisted options that are all variants of a Southern Ocean connector. So that's essentially a pipe between the ocean and the Coorong. They were assessed as the most feasible infrastructure options to really increase flushing and export enough salt and nutrients from the system to make a significant difference. What they are is the first option is a circulation option. That includes 2 pipes, one at the bottom of the North Lagoon, which will pump water in from the sea, and then another at the top of the South Lagoon, pumping that high nutrient, high salt water out. So it circulates water. And that one was assessed as providing the best ecological outcomes for the Coorong South Lagoon. The next best option is 1 pipe up the top of the South Lagoon, which you can pump in or out, obviously not both at the same time. That one provides the next best outcome. The third option still on the table is 1 pipe, again at the top of the South Lagoon, that pumps out only. So we get rid of that poor quality water, but we don't have the ability to pump in seawater, which is a much lower salt and nutrient content as well. In terms of locations, the locations for those are all here. So the circulation option would include a pipe at the bottom of the North Lagoon here, and all options include a pipe up the top of the South Lagoon. If you do want to know more about the Infrastructure Investigations Project, it's summarised really well in this document, which is available on the table there. And we can also talk about that one later. Okay, the third option in this package is looking at smaller, lower impact options that can be targeted to certain areas and scaled up or down as needed to help us achieve overall restoration outcomes. And we're calling this one the Ecological Restoration Project. So important to know this one's proposed as well. We've put in a proposal to the Australian Government. What are we looking at here? The talks today have set up the premise for this really well. Thanks, Nicole. So we're looking at things that improve nutrient cycling in the system and help to restore our important communities. So things like macroinvertebrate restoration, we learn a lot about how these little critters burrow down into the sediments, oxygenate the sediments, and help with that release of nutrients into the atmosphere, which is what we want. We don't want it locked up internally going through this algal cycle. Similarly, aquatic plant translocation, we know that plants' roots play a similar function. They oxygenate the sediments and help remediating it. The more macroinvertebrates and plants we get in a given area, the better quality of the sediment, the better conditions for everything to live, really. We actually know that aquatic plant translocation already works really well in the Coorong. So this is a picture from about 10 years ago in the Coorong. These bags contain seed-laden sediment that was taken from Lake Kantara and then translocated into the Coorong itself. So Michelle's team went and evaluated those sites, and the aquatic plant communities are in better condition at those sites. So it's something we want to assess the feasibility of, again, in conjunction with macroinvertebrate restoration, doing some trials there, to see how we can augment some of this recovery at a system scale. Like I said, these might be small scale, targeted to certain areas, but we can upscale them as needed. So it's something we might be able to implement fairly soon if that gets through. Algal removal. We know that removing those algal mats from the top of the water surface isn't something what we want to do. Michelle did some other trials there, or her team. When you rip off the algal mats from the water surface, you're always ripping away the rupia and those aquatic plant communities because they attach onto them. So we can't do any short-term algal removal in that way, but what are the ways that we might be able to manually remove some of the algae from the shorelines? Algae on the shorelines is a problem because it stops shorebirds from feeding in the sediment, and it also deposits more of that organic matter and more of the nutrients that degrade that sediment. Now, Luke touched on that this is probably not a big-scale solution for the Coorong. We're looking at this as a small-scale, short-term option to improve things within a bigger package. We've also been consulting quite closely with Ngarrindjeri and First Nations of the South East over the last 2 months and seeing what kind of ecological restoration option ideas are important to them. So really getting into co-design and with an aim to co-implement some ideas with those groups as well. Like I said, this will be supported by ongoing engagement as one of our key principles throughout the whole program. Pictures on the left are from us going down to Salt Creek and meeting with First Nations of the South East and Ngarrindjeri and talking through the roadmap, getting their feedback, which isn't yet reflected in the document that you see there, but it will be when we revise it in a couple of months' time to make sure it reflects their values and their ideas as well. And we will continue to do that through the whole program, and we will touch base when the infrastructure options are being assessed in more detail as well. Key finding synthesis. I've already seen that pile rapidly being depleted, and I've had to refill it twice, so I'm fairly confident that most people in the room have picked up a copy, which is great. And big shout out to Ryan Lewis up there for leading the development of that in consultation with our scientists. It's a great resource. If you want to have your say on the roadmap, please take our online Your Say survey. The details for that are in the little booklet that you've got, and we'll also be having an interactive workshop right up next. You can also attend a regional drop-in session. We've heard from the community that they want to hear from us outside of Goolwa. So going down to Kingston and Meningie in mid-June. So they're not a whole science forum, it's more of a project update and a chance to chat with some people about how the project is going. So consultation on the roadmap closes 19th of June, but yes, please do give your feedback and we will take that on board and we will be revising it. It is a draft. So thank you. I want to say a big thank you to the T&I leads and teams, of which I obviously can't name everyone here, for all the work that's gone into what's been presented today. Big shout out to our First Nations groups and their time and input for the whole program and with the roadmap. A number of DW staff, including COM staff who organised today, Goyder Institute, Coorong Partnership and everyone here today or online.